So Linda Murphy's going to tell us her story a little bit, but she came to me with a couple of songs that she wrote a few weeks back, and I was thinking, wow, when we get the opportunity, I want you to sing these. So this is Linda Murphy.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Just a preface to this song, I love that meditation, by the way. I came to Crosswalk about a year ago. And I've always believed in God. I went to Christian churches when I was a young girl. But I kind of went away from it because I'm my own worst enemy and all of my fear and shame. And I heard criticism and judgment. And by the time I was in my 20s, I just thought that I didn't belong in church. I thought that God didn't want me. So it's taken me a long road back. I've been in 12-step recovery 28 years. So I have a past and a wonderful, glorious life today that includes God, but coming to Crosswalk has kind of brought me home to the Jesus that I remembered as a little girl. And this song particularly, I actually wrote it before Pete started the Richard Rohr series, and it's about all of the woundedness and the brokenness that I can carry, and knowing that that's what blocks me from truly accepting that God loves me no matter what. So this song's called My Brokenness. In the past I walked alone, like a bird with broken wings. In my pain I did believe I deserve my suffering. Then I felt your love, a longing to come home. You reached out your hand. Now I'm not alone, and I will cry, Abba, Father, throughout the darkest night, and I will sing hallelujah when hope is out of sight, and I will trust in your mercy. To you I will confess, and by your grace you heal my brokenness. The ocean's made of broken waves, and mountains tumble to the sea. You're the only one who saves, and I'm so grateful you saved me. When life becomes a dance of painful circumstance, Jesus, come to me. You're my victory, and I will cry, Abba, Father, throughout the darkest night, and I will sing hallelujah when hope is out of sight, and I will trust in your mercy. To you I will confess, and by your grace you heal my brokenness.
Good stuff. She's got one more coming from her later on. Well, in fact, it is recorded right now, so you can come back and listen to that later on today. And the lyrics of her songs are also in your bulletin and your insert today, which I think are beautiful. So today, this is what I want to talk about. The number 2, equal to or less than 1 to 10, somewhere in that. I want to talk about 613 divided by 2. We're going to talk about negative 10 and, of course, 55. That's what we're doing today. So first, let me talk about 2. So in the beginning of the Bible, you have the book called Genesis, and Genesis is a story of beginnings. One of the stories of beginnings is the whole Jewish nation and the whole Jewish faith. Started with a guy named Abram. Abram left his family. They were away from their homeland. Dad took the whole clan many hundreds of miles north, and then all of a sudden this guy Abram gets this clear call from God. I want you to leave your dad's household and go to a new place that I'm going to show you, and I want you to start a new thing there, a new nation, a new way of thinking about how we relate to God, the whole thing. And Abram, crazy, says yes. And the reason I say crazy is the guy was 75 years old when that happened, and part of the deal is he didn't have any kids. And he's being told, you're going to start a new nation from your lineage. And he's got no kids. And he's looking at his wife, who apparently, according to the Bible, was really beautiful, and 65. Meaning, not a great likelihood of kids. And yet he heard this call, and it was so compelling that he did it. And so they went several days' journey, maybe a month's journey, into what we would call a modern-day Israel, and started this thing out. And they're doing life, and he's a very good businessman, and they're building wealth, and the business is going well, and still no kids. And he gets another call from God saying, okay, don't worry, it's going to work out. You know, you're going to have kids, you know, that numerous the stars in the sky. So it's going to work. But 10 years in, still no kids. And so Sarai, that's how she was called before her name became Sarah, said to Abram, before he was called Abraham, you know, maybe we missed a memo here. So there are other ways that we can get kids going. So I've got this servant girl that we picked up from Egypt. Her name is Hagar. How about we make her one of your wives and see if she can bear kids? And so he was like, okay. I'm sure that was a weird conversation, right? And so we don't know how old she is, but I bet she's younger than, at this point, 75, and I bet she was in childbearing years, and I wouldn't be terribly surprised if she was like in her teens or even 20s. So now you have 85-year-old Abram bringing on a new wife who is a quarter of his age, perhaps. And she gets pregnant. As soon as she gets pregnant, how do you suppose the dynamic in the household changed? Right, one, you got a pregnant woman that you're dealing with. Tough enough, right? Second, the woman who used to be your master is now sort of kind of your equal, but not really, and she's incredibly envious that you've got a baby in your tummy and she has not been able to conceive yet. Lots of problems, and probably from Hagar's point of view, apparently she was kind of laying it on a little bit and making things even less comfortable in the house. But the Bible also tells us that Sarai didn't exactly keep the peace. She did not exactly act with maturity, made life so miserable for Hagar that Hagar, this pregnant, probably young woman, decides to just leave. I would rather just go into the wilderness and die than live in this household anymore. That's what happened. And so she goes out into the wilderness completely on her own. Can you just imagine what she's feeling? Feels like all hope is lost. Well, what's going to happen to me? She's got to be wondering. This is misery. I was in a good spot, and now I can't go back. She felt like she was between a rock and a hard place, and there was nothing left for her. She was at her wit's end, and it was at that place that God met her, at the end of her rope. And the God met her through an angel, and the angel approached her and asked her two incredible questions, which are on the next screen. Where have you come from, and where are you going? Would you say those out loud with me? Where have you come from, and where are you going? I think these are perhaps the two most profound questions we should be asking all throughout our lives. I don't think it's an accident that the angel asks her this, which carried such great depth. Where have you come from, and where are you going? Just a quick test here. Did God know where she came from? Yes. These questions are not because the angel is ignorant. These questions are there because she needed to answer them. She needed to understand, where have I come from and where am I going? Very important questions that we need to ask throughout our lives. So now I need to talk about 1 to 10. So if a 10 is a great day, just the day of your life, and if a 1 is just a terrible day, I want to tell you about 2 of those different days in my chapter, a few that are kind of mixed. First, let's start with 1, because you want to know some dirt, don't you? All right, so I'm a sophomore in high school, getting along just fine, and all of a sudden this beautiful girl who happened to be a junior made it known to me that she was interested. And so I couldn't believe it. Lowly sophomore, and I decided to ask her out. And she became my first real deal girlfriend. Now our relationship progressed. It was the longest relationship I'd had to that point, and we were at about 3 months deep into our relationship. We were in a musical together, and it was a couple weeks after that was prom. She was a junior, so I got to go as a sophomore, feeling like a pretty big deal. And prom went great. We were getting along fine. Nothing changed. Prom was fine. I got in a little bit of trouble with my parents, but that's another story for another day. And anyway, the day after prom, I called her up, and she's not feeling good. So I thought, well, I'll just go cheer her up. So I got a flower or something and went over to her place. And her mom, who I knew well, let me go see her in her room where she was crashed out, and I had my flower and just said, hey, thanks for a great night last night. It was a lot of fun, and blah, blah, blah. And she takes the flower, and then she looks at me and said, we're over. I got dumped the day after prom. Can you imagine that? That's horrible. Who does that, right? I mean, it's terrible. Let me have a day to reflect on it and catch up. Nope, we're going to dump you right now after you brought the flower. It's like, come on, man. And I tell you, when that happened, that was a one day, okay? I was crushed. I mean, I'd never experienced anything like that before. This was the love of my life, right? And now it's over. And for a good chunk of time, I was in a funk. And you know what happened during that chunk of time? I thought a lot about what am I supposed to be picking up from this? What is this experience telling me? And here's a little clue. Sometimes what you think the experience tells you is not really, experiences themselves, I think, are sort of benign. But what you get from those, that's a lot up to you. And so I just had my heart broken. And I'm starting to ask the question, what does this tell me about me? And first it told me, okay, don't trust women, obviously. Can't trust women. And don't let your heart go because they'll just break it, right? Don't do that. So I put up a big wall, and for the rest of high school, never had another girlfriend. You ever see that movie, 50 First Dates? Well, that's about a girl with a traumatic brain injury, and it's kind of a cute movie. Oh, I just had 50 first dates with, no brain injury women whatsoever. I was not going to get into another relationship because I didn't want to take that chance. But then, at the same time, when you get leveled, especially when you're young, you start asking a really tough question. What is it about me that the day after prom, she dumps me? Everybody give me a nice, aw. Thank you. You ever been there, though? So I get through high school, and then I go to college, and I'm like, okay, everybody knows college is where you meet Mrs. Right. So my radar's open, where is she? And year number 1 passes, there's no Mrs. Right. And year 2 comes along, and I think I found Mrs. Right, and she thinks she's found Mr. Right. And so we get into a relationship, and we're as in love as an 18, 19-year-old can possibly be. Things are going just wonderful. We're talking plans. We're talking future. In the summer, I am part of a thing for the university to promote the university all around the country. And she goes home to her folks and is working a job or whatever. And we had a break point kind of in the middle of the summer where I could travel and go to see her at her place. So I go down there, and I could just tell things were not the same. Something was just off. And we'd talk on the phone and stuff, but something was in the air. And finally, it came to me. Finally, she told me, I cheated on you. Crushed me. We were making plans. Eventually that, not just that, but that is a symptom. When people cheat on each other, it's a symptom of something else going on in the relationship. And it was a symptom of, some unhealth in our relationship, and it eventually fell apart, and that was that. But I was at the same spot. This is another one day, right? That stunk. And asking the same questions. Can I trust somebody again with my heart? Should I dare? Am I ever going to bring down a wall? But in a much darker question, again, what does that say about me? Am I so unlovable? You ever been there? Maybe for you it wasn't a romantic thing. Maybe it was your parent. Maybe, I don't know. But we start dealing with this stuff, and it kills us. And it stays with us. And it informs our vision and our steps. Those are one days for me. I've had plenty of other one days since then. But those two, were pretty early. And I picked up a lesson from those. Whether or not it was the right one remains to be seen. Let me tell you about a 10-day, just to brighten it up a little bit, or some 10 days, seasons. So early on in high school, I made a decision to not do sports. I was really good at football. I was really average at basketball, and I was kind of okay at track. So I gave all those up so I could do music and theater stuff in high school, because I can sing, and we all know I'm a fantastic dancer, so that's a shoe-in. And so I decided to get into theater, and it was a good fit for me. I was pretty good at it. I was, for every musical we did, I was the male lead all the way through. And all the plays we did, I had a major role in all those. So in high school, in Ron Burgundy terms, I was a pretty big deal, right? And I felt pretty good about myself. What was fascinating about that, and I felt like I was on top of the world at every show you would do, we would always get this huge applause from the audience. And because I was the star of the show, me and whoever else was the lead, we were the last ones to come out, and the roar was always bigger for the leads. And so it just felt so good. And whatever Debbie did to me after prom, no worries, because I had the audience to help me out, and it felt pretty darn good. And it felt good for another way, and a deeper way, because my dad, with his job, he was what's called an executive minister, and he looked after all of our denominations, churches in Michigan. There was like 180 of them, and so he was always driving around all the time. And when I played football, he could never make a game. He made like one game because of his travel schedule, and same with basketball, very few. But a musical, you're only doing 6 or 8 shows, and he could make it to at least one. And you know what my mom and dad would do after every show is they'd come backstage, and they'd give me a big hug, which was a rarity because our family was German stoic and we didn't hug a lot. And he would say these words, and my mom too: "Great job. We are so proud of you." Wow, that felt good. But there was another question that started to be with me in terms of my esteem and my sense of identity and worth, and it was this: am I thinking about myself? Do I base my okayness, is my center, is my foundation of my life dependent on the affirmation of others? So 10 years later, almost 20 years later, I'm invited into a production here in Napa, South Pacific. I'm the male lead. And I'd forgotten how much fun it was. It was a blast to do the show. And every night that we would have the show, standing ovation. And in this particular show, the female lead is the bigger role, but I would walk out with her as the second, fiddle kind of a thing. And of course, just all the louder. It felt really good. Felt really good because things weren't always going great here. And it felt good to hear the crowd say, "Good job." And after the show was over, I'll never forget this. I dropped off some company who'd come out to see us at the airport, and on the way back, I just felt this tremendous grief because the show was over. And I started to do some work along these two questions, because these are really, what are you all about questions. And I started to wonder, that's where I really started to dig down, is some of my sense of identity and well-being predicated on whether or not people say good job? Which is a very important question in ministry and pastors. It's probably important for everybody, and I think guys probably struggle with it very specifically with performance more than women. Women, I think, in our culture probably have the same kind of question, but it's wrapped around physical looks and all that kind of stuff, because that's just the way our culture has been, and it's changing a little bit. But in pastoral ministry, guess who's the star of the show every Sunday? Yeah. And guess what I've learned? I learned this early on, so this wasn't new to me. But I learned early on that not everybody who says, "Great job, Pastor," actually means you did a great job. It's like in high school, you'd get the standing ovation if it was a lousy production or not, right? And I know that sometimes, or what else are you going to say? You see me after service, I've got to say something. "Hey, great job today, Pete." It's like, "Hey, thanks." And some days I actually believe it, but some days I'm like, "Yeah, you slept through half of that. There's no way that was that good." I know better. So I know that that's the case. But it starts to ask the question, what are we really about? Who are we? And the reason I asked you how your day is it a 10-day or a 1-day or somewhere in between, is whatever your day is, whatever your experience is, either it be a horrible experience or a glorious experience, they both teach us something. We learn something from both of those. A lot of times we don't pay attention on the glorious stuff because we're riding too high. And we never think to ask the question, where we come from, where are we going? Because we're too busy basking in our own reflected glory, to use a psych term. But when the painful stuff comes, we're left with the silence. We're left with the questions. Very important questions. And it all matters. This whole series is about taking a look at your life and learning from the whole thing. The awful stuff, the wonderful stuff, because it all belongs and it all is instructive, and it already has taught you something. You've already chosen to learn something from all of it. The question is, have you learned the right thing? Have you learned the best thing? And are you still learning from the whole ball of wax? Richard Rohr on the next slide says it like this: "I believe contemplation shows us that nothing inside us is as bad as our hatred and denial of the bad. Hating and denying it only complicates our problems. All of life is grist for the mill, the good and the bad. Everything belongs. God uses everything. There are no dead ends. There is no wasted energy. Everything is recycled. Sin history and salvation history are two sides of one coin." Man, that is dead on. Are you asking the question? Where are you coming from? And where are you going? That's the two. Those are my days 1 to 10. But now I need to talk to you about 613 divided by 2. From that moment, from Abraham becoming Abraham, and eventually had a son from Hagar named Ishmael, he was about 14 when Isaac was finally born from Sarah. And you can imagine how chummy Abraham and Ishmael had become over these years. It's his only kid, and now there's this new baby. Sarah's very sensitive about how Isaac is going to be treated and does not like some things that she sees in the dynamic in the household. So when somewhere around the age of 16, when Ishmael is 16, Sarah goes to Abraham and says, Abe, we got to talk. There's no room in this household for Hagar or Ishmael. You need to kick him out. And he did, with very little to go with. Well, that's a story for another day about how that certainly jacked with Ishmael, who, his lineage, God was still with him, by the way, and God still blessed him in many ways. He became the Arab people, by the way, settling in Persia. That's also where you find the connection between the Muslim faith and Abraham is through Ishmael. A rivalry goes back a while between Ishmael and Isaac. Pretty fascinating stuff, but I digress. After that, after the people start to develop, as they try to put down their own laws and understand who they are in comparison to other cultures, they finally settle, by the time Jesus is around, on 613 laws on the books, which beg at least 613 questions. So we've gone from 2 questions posed to Hagar, where are you coming from and where are you going, and now we have 613 questions. You know why laws are questions? Because as soon as you put a law in the books, the question is not, the law is don't murder. The question is, did you murder? The law is, did you steal? Or the law is, don't steal. The question is, did you steal? Every law has a question implied, inherent in the law itself. Have you obeyed the law? The religious leaders at the time of Jesus are caricaturized, probably unfairly, for being hyper vigilant about all things legal, making sure that everybody dotted their I's and crossed their T's just so, or they were in big trouble. And they would let them know that. And Jesus, who had this profound experience in the wilderness, by the way, after he was baptized, where I'm absolutely certain he was sorting out the 2 questions, where have I come from and where am I going? He comes back a changed guy, full of the power of the Spirit of God, and starts doing all kinds of stuff, teaching people in ways that resonate, healing people, doing crazy stuff like raising people from the dead, and crazy cool stuff like going into leper colonies where he wasn't supposed to go and healing them there, touching them there, talking to people he shouldn't be talking to, like a woman at a well in the country of Samaria, which they hated. It was like Dodgers company up there in Atlanta Giants. And then you got another situation. A woman is caught in adultery, and Jesus, redeems her, forgives her. You got Zacchaeus, a tax collector that nobody likes, and Jesus sees him and says, hey, get down off that tree. We're going to have dinner tonight, man. You've got a story to tell. This is Jesus all the way through, breaking laws. On the Sabbath, his boys are eating, which is breaking a Sabbath law in the way they were choosing to eat. He was called on breaking the Sabbath, and a miracle even that he was doing. So one day, toward the end of his life, these religious leaders come up to him and say, so Jesus, 613 laws on the books. What is the greatest commandment? What is the greatest of all these laws? And Jesus says, well, I'll give you 2. The first greatest commandment is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And a second is like it. You must love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these 2 laws, all of the laws of the prophets are built, and consequently are satisfied. 613 boiled down to 2. Love God, love others as yourselves. And because every law has an inherent question, a question is begged. How do we love God? How do we love others as ourselves? In my head, the Hagar questions and the questions begged by the 2 greatest commandments are very similar. Where are we coming from? Jesus is suggesting by his very life, we're coming from God. Where are we going? What are we going to do with our life? How do we love our neighbors as ourselves? Curious things. It shouldn't surprise us that out of all the laws, Jesus is going to focus on love too. He always focused on love. His lifestyle focused on love. His teaching focused on love. And it's not a great shock. In fact, on the next slide, Rohr tells us this: those who know God well, the mystics, the hermits, those who risk everything to find God, always meet a lover, not a dictator. You need to own that. You need to believe that the people who've gone to the greatest depths, they find that God is a lover, not a dictator. God is never found to be an abusive father or a tyrannical mother. but always a lover who is more than we dared hope for. How different than the account manager that most people seem to worship. God is a lover, not a hater. And it makes me wonder, you know, because part of that love your neighbor thing is that it's got that second variable, love your neighbor as yourself. And so it kind of makes me wonder, when we see people who are very hateful toward others, it kind of makes me wonder if they're actually being consistent. Is there anything in them that they really maybe hate themselves a little bit? So what else would we expect? And the only way you can hate yourself is if you haven't really dialed into this idea of the first commandment, that God is fully and completely love. That is our ground. That is our ground of being. So how do we do this? What does it look like for Jesus to love God and love others as himself? What does it look like for him to answer the question, where are you coming from and where you are going? You know, Jesus even said this. Toward the end of John, he says, I have come from the Father and I'm returning to the Father. I've come from there and I'm going back there. He knows where he's from. He knows where home is. And it gave him the strength to do everything. By the way, can you just for a moment realize what kind of a strong place this foundation of I am fully loved by God, can you imagine how strong that is if you really start to believe it? I mean, really, really start to believe it? Not just kind of, but really, really believe it? That really is true for you? That your center, your foundation, the ground of your being is that you are absolutely, completely loved by God. And that is the most important thing because that's where you're going and that's where you've come from. Do you understand how powerful that is? It's this powerful. If you're a kid and somehow you got the message from your parents that your love was based on something you did, your performance, which a lot of kids get accidentally, I think. Or maybe you were told by your parents you're no good, and I've heard plenty of stories like that. Maybe not with their mouth, but with their action, you're really not worth much. Or other things have happened in your life which have challenged your sense of self, so you're wondering if you're really lovely or worthy of anything. Do you see the difference in who you are and building your life if you're on this shaky house of cards over here that's based on all kinds of weird, twisted, emotional stuff, you know, from human stuff, versus a foundation on God, which is never changing and is always speaking to you, I love you, I'm with you. Do you understand the difference between those two? That's good news, isn't it? So I think that's where Jesus is coming from. I know where I'm from and I know where I'm going, but how does Jesus choose to go forward? The answer to that is in a cruciform way. Everybody say cruciform. Well done. You will impress your Christian friends for sure and confuse others. Cruciform simply means in the form of the cross. Now the cross we often look at, and a whole lot of theology has been built up around a sacrificial system of, and that's very important. I'll probably talk more about that closer to Easter. The long and the short of it is this. In this way of looking at the cross, you need to understand there are other ways which I'll get to, but in this particular sacrificial kind of way, what this means is, okay, we've all ticked God off, has this idea of more of the account manager, and we got to make up for all the sins that we've done, and so Jesus is like, done with all this sacrifice stuff, I'm going to be the final sacrifice. So he becomes the Lamb of God, the final sacrifice, so that every time we look at him on the cross, we say to ourselves, we're okay with God because this happened on the cross. Our forgiveness is guaranteed. It's done. We don't need to sacrifice anymore. We can't sacrifice enough anyway. It's already happened for us. So when we think about the cross and Jesus on it, that's one way of thinking about it, which is very, very powerful if we're trying to earn God's favor all the time. Difficult because we don't live in a sacrificial time anymore. We don't think like that anymore. But there's another thing I want you to see about cruciform and another way to think about the cross. Most of us think about this beam here. That's the vertical beam. When you're thinking of your relationship with God, when you're thinking of your spirituality, you're thinking me and God. You're just like this. And some of us, especially in our individualistic culture, that's all we think about. And we think to ourselves, as long as I get this right, so I'm going to have my quiet time. I'm even going to turn off K-Love and just be quiet because Pastor Pete said so. But then I'm going to turn K-Love on because that's also going to help this. And I'm going to read my daily bread. I'm going to read the Bible, maybe even memorize some scripture, say a prayer or something to make sure this is right. And I'm going to sing songs. I'm going to go to church because it's all about this. And a lot of people live their life and do their spirituality like this. But that is not cruciform. That is not fully Jesus. It's a part of it, but it's not fully it. Because the cross, right there in its name, has a cross beam, which is horizontal, not vertical. Horizontal, requiring outstretched arms. Cruciform is both vertical and horizontal. What are the two greatest commandments? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, but love your neighbor as yourself. They are both required if you really want this thing to work, if you want everything to belong, if you want to see integration, if you really want to walk deeply with God. You are never, ever, ever going to get there by vertical alone. It requires this. Consequently, you are never, ever going to get there if all you have is this. Because it requires both. What does this look like for Jesus? Well, up here, it's kind of a final way. I'll get to that in a second. But in his life, what did cruciform look like for Jesus? So he's grounded in God. He knows who he is. He knows where he's coming from. He knows where he's going. And now what does it look like played out in action? So Jesus comes across a woman at a well in Dodger country, and he's wearing his giant's garb, and she knows they're bitter rivals. He's a rabbi. He's Bochi. He's the coach. She knows he's not going to say a word to her, and he doesn't have to. Nothing in the culture says he's got to open his mouth to talk to this woman who's there. But he does. He chooses to go the extra mile. That's cruciform. He chooses to serve the person right in front of him. So he starts a conversation not to put her down, but to redeem her. This woman who felt lousy about herself because everybody told her she was lousy. Now he comes alongside, and everything he does with his words, his body language, everything says, you're redeemed. You may not know where you come from, but I do. You are deeply loved by God. Later on in his ministry, a woman caught in adultery is thrown right in front of him. He had every right to condemn her, judge her, but he did not. He went cruciform. He chose to reach down and lift her up. When he saw Zacchaeus up in the tree, he had the right to condemn him for ripping off the people of Israel, but he didn't do that. He went cruciform. He went beyond what was expected. The rest of the culture was saying, stand your ground, hold up, be tough, let them know who's boss. And Jesus says, the way of my Father is love. Love God, love others. Zacchaeus, let's do dinner tonight. I value you. I want to hear your story. When Peter blew it, denying even knowing him 3 times, Jesus' response to him was what? It was love. It was second chance. It was, let's try this thing all over again. That is Jesus. That is cruciform. And on the cross, certainly, the Scriptures write about it. Hymns and poetry's been written about it. I even sang a song years ago, or when I was first here. We had this guy named Ray Ernst, who was an amazing tenor voice, and he would lead the hymns, and it was in the choir, and just incredible Italian guy with passion all over. He was a bundle of passion, and he passed away, and they had me sing this song. He could have called 10,000 angels when he was on the cross. He could have. Did you ever think about that while he's up there hanging? He could have said back to the people, he said, you better watch out. You better watch out. You know what I can do. You know what's been done through me. I can raise the dead. You don't think I can put a few people in the tomb myself? He could have. He could have. But that's not what he did. Because the whole world wrapped up in church and politics at that point put him there. And Jesus' cruciform way at this point was to say, enough. Enough. No more violence. This ends today. No more sacrifices to God. That ends today. And no more buying into your political mess, your religious political mess of wars and more wars, violence and more violence. The violence is done now. That's cruciform. It's a way of nonviolence to make a greater statement about what it really means to be the people of God. This is countercultural, if you haven't figured that out. This is not the way our world works. The way of our world works on ascent. How can you climb the ladder? How can you be the best you can be? How can you have the most power, the most money, the most success? Are you catching what Jesus is? It's the descent. It is the -10. On a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of good days, it is choosing -10. Choosing the way of descent. Choosing at a farewell dinner of sorts, they didn't know it yet, where everybody needed their feet washed and none of the disciples are budging, and Jesus gets a towel and to a person washes every disciple's foot. That's cruciform. That's the way of Jesus. That's what it looks like. And we only experience the full meal deal of life filled with God when we are both vertical and horizontal. When we are loving God, loving others. Asking the question along the way, where am I coming from? Where is my ground? And where am I going? What am I going to do now? In the next slide, Roar responds to this stuff. Those who agree to carry and love what God loves, which is both the good and bad of human history, and to pay the price for its reconciliation within themselves. It's what Jesus did on the cross. These are the followers of Jesus. The leaven, the salt, the remnant, the mustard seed that God can use to transform the world. The cross is the dramatic image of what it takes to be such a usable one for God. These few followers of Jesus are enough to keep the world from its path toward greed, violence, and self-destruction. But they are few. They are few because the invitation is countercultural. And it's difficult. It is an invitation for you and I to really fundamentally ask those questions. Where are we coming from and where are we going? Are we really about loving God and loving others, or are we just saying it because it's the right thing to say? Are we really going to be the people of God? Or are we just going to be one of the crowd that looks a little more religious than the rest? But it's the people of Jesus. It's the people who walk in those depths that actually get the job done. And we pay the price, gladly, willingly, looking for the opportunity to be cruciform. Which, of course, brings me to 55. So I told you about Hagar and Abraham. There's another Hagar that lived many years later. His name was Sammy Hagar, and he was a rock star in the 1980s. And I linked the video to his very famous song, "I Can't Drive." Nicely done, that's right. So if you want to watch Sammy Hagar buzz through the streets in a Ferrari, then when my teaching launches this afternoon, there's a link, and you can enjoy. I grew up on MTV, right? I was there when it was born as a young teenager, and me and friends would watch the 3-hour loop, because that's all the videos that were out there, and they'd start all over again, and we'd watch them again, right? That's how lame my life was. Well, anyway, I digress. So, I can't drive 55, but this past week I decided to run a little experiment. So my wife and I, we're kind of nuts on the whole green thing and energy and all that. So a few years ago we bought a Prius, love it, and we're saving the planet on your behalf. You're welcome. And a couple years ago, we'd always thought this would be really fun to have, but they were way expensive. But I found a used Nissan Leaf, which is basically a golf cart, right? But it's street legal, and it drives like a car and all that. And it was so low miles and such a good deal. I was like, oh, we got to do this. And it worked out good because I needed a car for Lakin to run around in. So she's driving the old clunky van to school. And so this is my main car that I drive back and forth to work and stuff. The way I drive it, which is 90% higher speed on the highway and just a few miles around, I usually know that I'm going to get 60 miles out of the thing before it needs to be recharged. If you're just around town, maybe you'll get 80, maybe even more, but for the way I drive, my conditions and all that, 60 miles. Guaranteed. I know it's going to work out. So I had this experiment that I started last Sunday. The experiment was this: will I get more miles out of my golf cart if I drive the speed limit? which I usually had not before. And so I set my cruise at 55. And you know what I discovered at 55? Nobody else drives 55. That's the first thing I noticed. And people were so pleased to see me, they offered me hand gestures as they were going around me. Wonderful. We live in such a polite, good world. Well, anyway, what do you think happened? Do you think I had got more miles out of my car when I drove a little slower? Yeah, how about that? I had more charge in my battery, so my car could go further because it had more energy to go forward if I went a little slower. But you know what? That's not the only batteries that got a little bit more of a charge. I got a charge. Because when you're not worried about keeping up with everybody, and that happens all the time, you just kind of chill. You're just cruising along. I mean, this happened this morning. I'm on my way. I'm coming over the Southern Crossing Bridge, and there are 3 cars racing. None of them should have been racing. And this car goes by me, had to be doing 85 or 90, flying. Luckily, it was a minivan, so it was designed for such speed, right? And it's screaming around, trying to work its way around, and I'm like, you're going to hit a stoplight. Who cares? It's just a big waste of time. Meanwhile, I'm just, you know, because I'm just going 55. You know, I learned this lesson. My family, we're into camping, and so we pull this trailer around, and we pull it with our minivan, which is funny. But as we pull this thing around, you can't go more than 60 miles an hour. You're going to blow your transmission. So it's like I could put my manliness in check, because I don't need to go fast because I can't go fast. I'm not allowed to go fast, or it's going to cost me thousands of dollars. And so I got really used to just hitting 60 miles an hour and hitting the cruise and just cruising right along. And I knew that anytime we drove to go anywhere camping, I knew I was pretty chill. I was like, hey, I kind of like this. I don't have to worry about passing anybody. Everybody's passing me. I don't care. This is the best I can do. The choice was made for me at that point. Some of you, the choice has been made for you to slow down. The doctor tells you, you've been running your knees too hard. Time to replace those puppies, and you're going to be in pain sitting around a lot. Or you have some other physical condition that you can't do it anymore, or your body's just slowing down. You just can't go as fast anymore, and you have to slow down. But this past week was a choice to slow down. And I discovered that my choice to slow down worked for me, just like when it wasn't a choice. That I actually felt better. I actually felt more at peace when I just chose to slow down a little bit. I wonder if we are even capable of really asking and answering the questions, where have we come from and where are we going, if we're going 85? I kind of don't think so. I'm wondering where in your life you need to slow down. You need to slow down with Jesus, who was real good at slowing down. Yeah, he went nuts when he had to go nuts, but boy, this guy pulled away and he was quiet and still, because he knew if he wanted to go do that again, he needed to do this, to regroup, to re-ask the questions, where am I coming from? Where am I going? What is my ground of being, and what does that mean for how I go? What does it mean to reconnect with the love of God, and how is that going to inform this? That's what he was doing. This is a choice to follow Jesus in his footsteps. And I'm wondering if you're willing to say yes to that. If you're at that space in your life where you're finally realizing, maybe proactively, hopefully, before it all hits the fan, that this is a good choice. I'm going to take these questions seriously. I'm going to really let everything belong and see what God can teach me through the whole thing, instead of waiting until it catches up, waiting until you have to stop. I'm wondering if you'll choose to follow Jesus. So to help us have some time to think that through, we have another song from Linda called I Choose You.
There we go. Start getting used to this. Okay. Not going to talk a lot about this one. This is actually started out as a poem, And one thing I related to in the Richard Rohr book was my early years of meeting Jesus and understanding who Jesus was as a child was all about love. It was all about this wonderful joy and suffer the children to come unto me and all of those good things. And I'm just been allowed recently to really reconnect with that and find that again. And Richard Rohr had a comment in his book that made me laugh. Coming out of the Catholic tradition, he says, you know, the crucifixion statues in that one called the Sacred Heart, where it's actually Jesus on the cross with a heart, I guess, and he said, really terrible art, but good theology. And he made the point that, you know, Jesus asks us to open our hearts. Jesus is all about love, and that's what brings me back to Jesus time and time again. This invitation to break my heart wide open on a deeper level. So this is called I Choose You. It's kind of my love song back to Jesus.
Eternal song, the cadence of the starlight in the dark, the shade